Hello, I'm Ted Burdett from Fourneau. Let's check out some baking. Wait a second, I need to back up a little bit more. Hello, I'm Ted Today I want to share with you a recipe for no-knead bread. This is one of our favorite recipes, a kind of bread where you mix ingredients together and let time and fermentation work those ingredients into the right conditions to make great bread. It's a lot less work and it's going to develop a really wonderful flavor over time. No-knead bread is really simple to make. There are just 4 ingredients that go into it: flour, salt, yeast, and water. It's that simple. For making bread at home, there are a few essential tools that you'll want to have on hand. A plastic dough scraper for getting fermented dough out of a mixing bowl, a dough knife to scrape dough up off of your working surface, and a scale is probably the most important thing of all. To be able to measure your ingredients by weight rather than volume is going to ensure far better results. And clearly, we're going to be using a Fourneau for doing our baking, so you've got to have that in the oven. In order for bread to spring properly, it needs to have high heat right away. The Fourneau is your baking chamber. Inside of it, you're going to trap heat, which is going to radiate evenly and create an envelope of steam that keeps the outside of the bread nice and moist so that it can spring beautifully, and it also develops a gorgeous crispy crust. All right, get ready for baking. It starts with 500 grams of flour, 501's close enough, followed by 2 grams of dry active yeast. And that's going to go straight in with the flour. And then measure out the water to 375 grams. And last, salt, 10 grams. Mix the salt in with the flour and the yeast. Then we'll take those dry ingredients and just incorporate them by hand. Once the dry ingredients are all mixed together, we take the water, pour it on in. Mixing with your hands is a really great way to get familiar with the consistency of what you're making. This doesn't take a lot of mixing. All you need to do is get all of the ingredients wetted out, and time is going to take care of the rest. So I've got everything mixed together here, and I'm going to cover this with a tea towel and let it sit out on the counter at room temperature for somewhere between 12 and 18 hours. The warmer it is, the shorter the fermentation process. The cooler it is, the longer the fermentation process needs to be. So I've got an example here that's been fermenting at room temperature for 18 hours. And I'm going to show you how to do the initial forming for this. I'm going to flour the counter with a little dusting of just the same bread flour that we're using to make this. Take the dough scraper and scrape this fermented dough out onto the counter. You're probably going to want to have some flour on your hands to handle it, or some water on your hands to handle it. And we're just going to spread it out a little bit. The envelope fold is like the sides of an envelope. We're going to take 4 sides of the bread and fold them in on one another to get this into an orderly shape and to start working the gluten into something that resembles bread. So the first fold is like that toward ourselves. The second fold is going to be on top the other way. And then we're going to pull this over and pull it over again. As we fold stuff over, a little bit of wet dough gets exposed, so you may need to re-wet or re-flour your working surface. This has been roughly formed, and it's starting to look a lot more orderly. It's starting to perk up a little bit too as the protein gets activated. I'm going to do another forming technique that I like to use on this to sort of get this all worked into a ball. So I'm going to pick this up on my hands. If it's it's a little sticky, just use a little flour. And I'm gonna start rolling the bottom under and into the center. And as I do this, you can see that the outside top surface starts to stretch out a little bit and get a little glossy. You might see some tears in the outside surface. Don't worry about it too much. We want to avoid those, but they will sometimes happen. And then get this worked into a nice ball. We can also kind of fold it under itself on the table if doing it in the air is a little bit hard to do. Okay, so that's our first forming. We've got kind of this ball of dough. We're gonna let this dough sit under a towel for half an hour or an hour. So what we're gonna do is form this up one more time, put it in the forming basket or a banneton, and then put this banneton in the fridge to continue fermenting. To give it its second forming, I am going to flip it over, make sure that we've got a little bit of flour on our working surface. And it should have slumped down a little bit after the first envelope forming. This one's still feeling pretty springy. That's okay. And now I'm gonna do another envelope fold on it. So I'm gonna fold that front edge toward me, the back edge toward the front one, give it a nice pinch if you need to. The more flour you get on the surface, the harder it's going to be to kind of pinch it to itself. So flour as much as you need to, but not too much. You'll figure out the balance. And then we pinch it on the bottom. I'm gonna give it a little pinch on the sides too. A little bit of flour dusted into our banneton, very lightly, and fold that over, flip it over rather, so that it's seam side up in the banneton. Give it some pinches, so it's all closed up from the envelope form. We're gonna wanna wrap it up in a tea towel. So give that 4 folds, kind of like the envelope fold, and keep most of the towel on top. That'll help insulate the bread and keep it from drying out in the refrigerator. And that thing is ready to go into the fridge, where we can leave it anywhere from 4 to 72 hours. Here is a loaf that we formed up, put into a banneton, and that has been in the fridge for a few hours. So I'm gonna open up this little tea towel, and you can see that the seam has healed up as it has sat. Now all we have to do is flip this over onto one of our Fourneau trays to make some bread. Now let's take a look at setting up for baking. I've got a Fourneau preheated in the oven over here at 500 degrees. This is also preheating the whole Fourneau. This is really important because in order for bread to spring properly, it needs to have high heat right away. When you open the door of your oven, you end up releasing a lot of heat. The Fourneau keeps that trapped and concentrated. The first stage is springing the loaf. We're gonna take our formed, fermented, and rested dough and flip it out of the banneton onto the tray. Flipping the dough out is easy. We just put the tray upside down on top of the banneton and flip it over. We don't want to disturb the dough too much and pull the banneton off. Now that we have the dough on the tray, we're going to take a sharp razor blade and score the dough. This is going to give the outside of the dough a place to split as the inside fills with gas, and we form a beautiful crumb inside the bread. When we take this over to the oven, we'll use a hot pad or a folded up tea towel to remove the hatch from the Fourneau and slide the tray inside. Pour water into the baking stone of the Fourneau Grande to create a blast of steam. High heat right away is the key to rapid oven spring. Introducing steam to the baking chamber not only gives you even heat, but it allows for the formation of a really robust crust. This mimics what happens in a commercial bread oven. Close the hatch and allow all of that gas inside to expand. And we'll let this bake for 15 minutes. Now that the bread is sprung, the second stage of baking is browning, where we take our loaf and move it on the tray into the open oven so that the crust can brown all over. Once this is cooked for another 15 to 25 minutes, and it's nice and brown on the outside, you're done. The bread can be taken out of the oven. Is there anything else I should say?